This is the all-new Citroen C5 X that lobbed locally late 2022 and has now landed in the Chasing Cars long-term garage. We typically run 4 or 5 different long-termers at any given time to find out what all manner of vehicles are like to live with, and we've now got this Citroen for the next 4 months and 10,000 kilometres. But why this car? Well, to answer that, let's consider C5X's provenance. The first C5 arrived 2 decades ago as a 5-door wagon or liftback choice, and both were sinfully ugly. Gen 2 arrived in 2008 in a choice of sedan or wagons, and it was slightly less ugly, and it kicked off being quite popular, but over the decade its popularity dwindled in the face of SUVs. Which brings us neatly to the C5X, which its maker claims melds elements of sedans, wagons and SUVs for a one-style-fits-all format. It's no longer quite the eyesore, although it still is achingly French. Label it however you like, but much like its Subaru Outback rival, you don't have to squint too hard to see that it's actually a wagon. At 4.8 metres, it's a large one at that. In other words, it's the sort of family hauler that Aussies used to be drawn to before the rise in popularity of the SUV. So we'll use it for the urban commute and for the school runs, as well as a grocery getter and a load lugger. We'll also hit the long and winding roads to try and assess its grand touring grand chops that Aussies have long expected from large wagons. It's worth pointing out as well that it's not the old days anymore. So despite the French army flexibility of this machine, it is a niche offering from a maker that sells low volumes. So who would the C5X appeal to? Well, the no-brainer is for those of us of European extraction, like me. And then there are Aussies who like to travel to Europe and want to bottle that European vibe and bring it back home, which is also me. Obviously, the French wagon, albeit one that's made in China, does lure those with kids, which is me. And it also appeals to anyone who wants something that will fit the family-friendly bill without having to go to a Me Too SUV. So far, so right down my avenue. Our C5 X Shine 1.6 THP 132, to give it its full name, clocks in at $57,670 list before options. The almost military-like Amazonite grey adds $690. So this particular example is $63,000 drive away in New South Wales. I'm certainly looking forward to the so-called advanced comfort suspension and the 12-way adjustable Paloma leather seats on a 2,000 kilometre road trip that I'm about to take to country Victoria. But it does come with a bunch of luxuries that I do hope will make the long burn experience in the crush of Sydney traffic that much easier to endure. One thing that I am a little bit sceptical about though is that this 4.8 metre wagon is being lugged around by a 1.6 litre turbo engine. And despite its jacked up ride height and some of the plastic cladding, it is front wheel drive. It's the sort of formula that does suggest to me that all-terrain capabilities is merely suggested, but how that impacts this car in the Aussie experience, well, that remains to be seen. It does offer 133 kilowatts and 250 newton meters, which isn't too bad for a little 1.6 litre engine. However, it is down on the 165 kilowatts and 300 newton meters that this engine makes when it's shoehorned into the Peugeot 508 Sport Wagon. And that's certainly a viable option that some French car lovers will certainly have their eyeballs on. It's also a shame that right now Citroen don't offer the plug-in hybrid version that is on sale overseas that does offer 50 kilometres of all-electric range. So the C5X really is positioned as a comfy cruiser, and it's that aspect that's really going to come under the microscope, particularly the ride quality that Citroen describes as magic carpet-like. And given that it's not all that powerful, equal scrutiny will come under its 6 litres per 100 combined fuel consumption claim. Speaking of literage, we'll see how handy its 545 litre boot space is in the real world, particularly given it's an SUV substitute. And I'll also spend a bit of time in the back seat though, in a manner that's purely safe for work, if you get my gist. So let's have a quick whip through the cabin and see what it's got. Well, a grand tour of the interior reveals a sort of whiskey bar ambience and a sense that the money that you've invested was well spent. You get a big 12-inch multimedia screen and this sort of like bamboo effect inlays, and there are hardly any cheap plastics in here, which is the real trick into bringing an upmarket vibe. The steering wheel's, well, it's not quite round, and the whole transmission selection is downright weird, but that's what you're buying into with the French experience. It really is a minimalist sort of approach in here, which is really fetching to me, but the real highlight in here is the seats. Citroen spends a whole 5 paragraphs on its public website banging on about how good these seats are, and they're 12-way electric in the driver and 10-way in the passenger with heating and cooling. For the short-term runs around town, so far they've been exceptional, but I will find out what they're like for the long burn when I spend 8.5 hours in them driving to country Victoria. It's also fully featured in here, including quite a large sunroof. But if there's one thing that I've already noticed, it's this kind of shiny effect at the bottom of the steering wheel. It does blare sunlight straight in your eyes during daytime. If the C5X turns out to be as quiet and comfortable as it seems, it certainly ought to be my sort of car. Thing is, I'm a real stickler when it comes to annoyances, so it'll be interesting to see if those gremlins that a lot of French car lovers call character conspire to any deal breakers with my experience with the Citroen. That's because I've driven quite a few different French machines lately, and most of them have been Peugeots, and there have been some attributes that have forced me to come up with new and colourful swear words. We'll have to see how much French you will have to pardon me for when we wrap up our long-term experience in a few months' time. So tell us what you want to know and what you want to see in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.